Welcome. This is Samantha Skelly, and you are listening to the Hungry for Happiness podcast, where we dig deep and discover how to reconnect into your body, heal your relationship to food, and finally feel the liberation and freedom you desire. Kleenex is encouraged, and pants are optional. What's up, Phoenixes, and welcome back to the Hungry for Happiness podcast. This is episode 006 with Andrea Owen. I am so excited for you guys to check this episode out. We dig into shame and perfectionism, two massive topics that always come up in the Hungry for Happiness community. Andrea Owen is an author, mentor, and certified life coach who helps women get what they want by just letting go of perfectionism, letting go of control, isolation, and finally just choosing courage. She is the author of 52 Ways to Live a Kick-Ass Life, BS-Free Wisdom to Ignite Your Inner Badass and Live the Life You Desire. Her second book, How to Stop Feeling Like Shit, will be released January 2018. I can't wait for you to hear this episode. What's up, Phoenixes, and welcome back to the Hungry for Happiness podcast. I am super stoked for this conversation. Andrea Owen was recommended to me by Elizabeth D'Alto, who's my homegirl, who you guys all know. And you know, when I first started reading about Andrea and her story and what she was talking about, so much of what she's into pertains to the context of what we talk about at Hungry for Happiness. Shame, vulnerability, which is two huge things that you guys know come out all the time. And Andrea has dialed this in. And I can't wait to get your insight and your story and just like the nuances of how you talk about these two things. You know, vulnerability is a word that is kind of like popular. It's kind of like hippie now, you know, like everyone's talking about it. Like, let's be vulnerable. And sometimes like we don't really understand what it means to be vulnerable, or people use vulnerability in can be sometimes manipulative ways and just like wrong, you know? Yeah. So I'm really excited to like get the goods on your perspective and how you use it in your work. So thank you so much for hopping on.
Awesome. I'm excited. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So the first question of the podcast we ask all our guests is, what is the one thing about life that makes you feel most alive?
Oh God, the first thing that came to me is love. I mean, it's not like the easiest and most obvious answer is love. And I'm not talking about like, for me, it's like the little moments. It's these like little tiny moments of love and for myself and seeing how far I've gone. But even, you know, these little moments like of sitting at the dinner table with my kids and hearing their favorite parts of their day, or, you know, watching my son read and have him laugh about whatever he's reading. You know, he doesn't know I'm watching him. And, you know, my husband will be talking to me and I won't be actually listening to him because I'm like, my God, you're so good looking. Oh. Like small moments of the people that I care about the most is what makes me feel most alive.
I love it. And it's beautiful that you can actually reflect that, because in order to really get sunken into those moments, it requires a high level of presence, you know, just being super present, connected into your body and just being like zoomed out a little bit and just being like, wow.
And those moments are really vulnerable too, because like that could all get taken away from me in a second. And that's what a lot of people do. You know, it's like, then we start thinking about like, what if something happened to them? Like go down that whole catastrophe thing. Yeah. So, I mean, and I still do that every once in a while. I'll find myself in those moments. And it just, again, like you said, it's about paying attention and noticing it.
Mm-hmm. So when you pay attention and you notice it and you realize you're being attached to something, or you're trying to control that situation, what is your process in that moment to kind of like derail that and get back into like being like super present and aligned?
I just, you know, I try not to make things mean something. So I call it like the ultimate ass kicker when we beat ourselves up for beating ourselves up. Because what happens a lot in personal development is like we gather this self-awareness and we're like we're on the, you know, personal development train and we're all excited. And then we come across something that like a behavior that we know doesn't serve us. And then we can fall back into negative self-talk about that. Like, oh, well, great. You know, there's no hope for me. Here I go back. You know, I've done all this work and it's beating yourself up for beating yourself up. And so I am really cognizant of that. And just, you know, we're meaning-making machines as humans. It's just how our brains biologically work. We like to make up stories and we like to have a conclusion about them. And that's what I watch out for. It's like, what am I making up? And I just move on. I don't spend like a ton of time self-reflecting on every single thing that comes my way. I don't have time. I have 2 kids.
Yeah, girl.
Like, okay, that just happened. That's my favorite mantra that I use. And I just move on.
Yeah. You say that just happened?
Yep. That's my favorite mantra.
I love that.
To myself when I fall into negative self-talk, when I fall into compare and despair, when I fall in any of that, it's because I'm not a big fan of positive affirmations. I just don't think that they work all by themselves.
I totally agree with you. I hear it from my listeners and my subscribers all the time. They're like, so I've been doing these like affirmations because everyone and their dog is telling me that like, that's what we should do, and nothing's working. And it's like, we have to get like underneath of like, what is actually perpetuating that from happening to take you over here. So you have to like swing the other way. And it can get super sticky.
Yeah. So mostly it's just like, I recognize that it's happening. I don't beat myself up for it happening. I don't try to turn it into like this big spiritual moment of like, what's the gift in all of this?
Yeah.
Like, no, I just like, oh, okay, well that just happened, and I move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's super interesting that you bring that up, because, we were just talking before we started recording the show, like I'm now living in San Diego, and Andrea used to live in San Diego. And I find here with this community, and let me know if you feel the same, but it's like it's almost like so spiritual that we have to find meaning in every bad thing that happens. It's like someone cuts you off and you're like, oh, what is it in you that's like, oh, making that person cut you off? I'm like, you just fucking cut me off. Like, we don't have to obsess over it. Like, we don't have to obsess over it. And I think essentially that's what you're saying is like, okay, that just happened. Cool. Let's just move on. And I love that, because I think we can, when people are so deep into this work, it's like the obsession of personal development is almost as destructive as like some of the other shit that we do. Right.
There's actually a name for it. It's called over-identification. And it's when we do that. It's like when we, and I've had some students myself, and I've done it myself too. It's like, you want to label everything, like get out your label maker. And it's like, what is this? And what does this mean? And is that in line with my values? And sometimes like, I just tell some of my students, I'm like, you're overthinking it. It's okay if you don't identify and pick apart every single thing in your life. I don't. Sometimes I just want to talk about like dry shampoo and like countertops. But there's a time for everything.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this whole concept of like labeling and identifying things, because that's our ego, right?
Yeah.
Our ego's like, I am this. This is who I am. This is what I do. And over the last couple of years, I personally have been on this path of like, how can I strip myself naked of identities? Before it was like, I am a dancer, I am an actress, I am a stunt double, I am a vegetarian. And it's like, I created those to like satisfy my ego. Right. So how can we be sort of like naked in our identity and just with the being without freaking out the ego?
That's a loaded question, Samantha. I don't know if I've ever even thought about that. I just try not to take it all too seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that what it comes down to, I was just thinking about this morning, and it's going to sound so cliche and like life coachy, but like the answers really are inside of you. And I think that can be detrimental to a lot of people. Sometimes what really keeps my ego in check is that if you think about the universe and you think about like this planet, like hurling through the universe, and like how small we actually are. And that really at the end of the day, it's not that big of a fucking deal. Like that pulls me back a lot. Just reels it in. And like, it's really like, what do I need to do the next right thing? What do I need to do?
Oh, yes.
Keep myself just paying attention, but not getting so far in my own head where I'm not paying attention at all. Does that make sense? Like,
it makes complete sense. It makes complete sense. It does. And I think I love what you said. What is the next right thing to do? I think that's such a beautiful thing, because I know for a lot of the people that I work with, and I'm guessing it's you as well, is it's like we're thinking so linear in such a linear fashion, and so attached to what we think that we want, that we don't actually leave space for what could be.
right now.
And right now, it's like, what is super good for me right now in this moment? Not what I think is going to be good for me in 10 years from now. And I'm trying to control everything that I'm doing now in order to make that align. Because that's how our minds are thinking, but that's not actually indicative of how life works and unfolds. Like we both know.
It's just right now. And that's hard because, you know, like we, especially within the online space, like we see these people that we admire and that we follow, and we like make up stories about how their life is so great. And they might be 10 steps ahead of us. You know, they might have been doing this work for a lot longer than us, or they might actually not have their shit together as much as we think that they do. So but whatever we're making up, and we think that we need to be over there now. And it's like, I used to do that so much. And really I wrote a whole chapter in my first book about this. Like, what if right now, like you're not supposed to make any movements? What if right now you're just supposed to stay where you are? Yes. And because we put so much pressure on us to make those like huge jumping movements.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's super interesting. Like, how can we just like chill and do nothing? You know, you work with women who are high achievers, right?
Very much so.
Yeah. You find that pattern happens a lot, right? Of like
control. Yeah. It's overachieving. It's, you know, hyper independence. It's a lot of control. It's a lot of perfectionism, and it's a lot of hiding out.
So what do you feel in your experience and with working with women is the fear, or like the driving force behind the desire and the need to be in so much control?
Because not having that is uncertain, and not having that is vulnerable, and life is vulnerable. Like being in a relationship is vulnerable. This conversation that you and I are having right now is vulnerable. And it's so scary for some that it's paralyzing. So what they do, I remember in my very first corporate job I had when I was 22 years old, I worked in a buying office in San Diego for a chain of surf shops. And it was like my dream job. And my boss said, there are so few things that you can control in your life, so control the things that you can. And what she was referring to was my desk, like your workspace, because it was like my first corporate job. You know, she was basically giving me that advice. I ran with that advice. So like just control everything. And I was like, that's the best advice ever. And really, because it was about, I was so afraid of making mistakes. I was so afraid of being creative and not doing it right. I was so afraid of having hard conversations and telling people no, that like I tried to control everything else around me, including other people. And it was a total disaster. And that's a lot of the women that I work with. It's a lot of micromanaging. And it just, it can be very frustrating for them. Just they get to the point where they're exhausted.
What is a belief shift? So we're talking about like coming from a place of like fear, needing to be in control, like terrified of things going wrong. And there's like perfectionism threaded into that whole like clusterfuck of emotions. What do you feel is like a core belief shift that needs to be anchored in order to just like surrender and relax a little bit more into what is?
That no matter what happens, you're going to be okay.
Right, cool.
And I think that is so hard to believe, because we're so afraid of things going wrong. At the bottom of it, it's like we're afraid that people are going to leave us. We're afraid that people are not going to like us or love us, and we're afraid of looking stupid. It's shame stuff, and we're afraid of. And this is a biological thing that our brains have not evolved from the caveman days, back where when you were rejected, like that meant death, like
ostracized and die.
Yeah, you would literally die. And so our brains still don't understand that if we are rejected by someone or even a group, that we will go on living. Like we'll still be able to find food, like we'll still be able to, but it's this like innate belief that we have that's really hard to change our thoughts and behaviors, because it's so deep within our old lizard brain. So I kind of got off track there about what was your original question? About vulnerability. And what's the core belief that we need to have? Yeah, it is that we are going to be okay. And what we're really good at is finding evidence that we're not going to be okay.
Yes.
And sometimes we make it up. You know, it's like we don't have any evidence that it's not going to be okay. You know, nobody spontaneously combusted because someone broke up with them, but we make up that will happen.
For sure. And you make such a good point. Our brains are actually still engineered for survival. And we live in a world where that's just not the case. Like we're not gonna die.
Yeah.
right? And also it's interesting. Our brains are still rooted in that survival mechanism. Like, I need to survive. Like, look at all this shit that could go wrong. Let's obsess over it.
Right.
And it's interesting because today we're so disconnected from our intuition,
Yes.
right? Which was the very thing back in the caves that we actually needed for survival. So, it's like we need to like release that survival brain and like introduce the good part of when we were in the cave, which was our intuition. And that's what's messing up a lot of women. And I think, being disconnected from our body is like, we don't trust ourselves. Thus, we need to control everything because we don't trust ourselves. So getting back to the core of like, how can we connect into our bodies, use our intuition for guidance? Like you said, like it's all within us. Therefore, we develop a foundational level of self-trust. Therefore, we relax on the control. Is that right there?
Totally. And self-trust is such a it's actually been a theme that I've been talking about to my audience a lot lately, because I was for a long time did not trust myself. I didn't trust my intuition. I had back-to-back bad relationships where my intuition was like screaming at me to walk away, and I didn't. And I did not trust that. I mean, that's a whole different story, because I was in a place where I was like, I'd rather be in a bad relationship than no relationship. I was a love addict. And really, I think it's both learning how to trust yourself by being quiet, which is so hard for so many women, and learning how to be present, and also like retraining your brain to have different thoughts. And that's my jam. That's what I love doing. It's a little bit of, cognitive behavioral therapy and it's the rewiring of it, because you've been wired a certain way for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. It's going to take a minute.
It's going to take a hot minute. That's it. Yeah, you dialed it. And also it's interesting. Normally with my audience, for instance, who struggle with food, it's like, I don't trust myself around food. And then, so when we shift and we go to do the work to start like cultivating that trust around food, what they automatically think of is the personality and the ego, the part of them that has let them down in the past. And that's what they're looking to trust. And actually we need to just forget that altogether and know that there's like this deeper part of us, like our soul, that we get to trust, that does not lead us wrong. But because there's no evidence of that happening yet, we almost have to take action without the clarity. And then through that evidence and through taking action and seeing the results, that's how we start to develop that trust. It's super interesting. And that's the hardest part for women, is like, but I have all of this baggage and evidence as to like why I cannot trust myself at all. Like, how am I supposed to just like take action and just like hope that it's going to work? But that's exactly what we need to do in order to start to cultivate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. My struggle, I mentioned before we started recording, I had an eating disorder all through my 20s. And, for me, whether it was alcohol, whether it was, I was an exercise addict, whether it was exercise, alcohol, men, it was control, because I was also severe codependent. And it didn't matter to me like which one it was. It was just the symptom of what was going on for me. Again, I didn't trust myself, and I was so afraid to deal with the stuff underneath, which I didn't even, during that time, especially in my 20s, like I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know really anything. It's all in retrospect. But I didn't trust that if I dove into my feelings, and then if I shared with someone else, even my therapist who I trusted, if I shared like the darkest shadow parts of me, like that to me was like sudden death. Intimacy and trust and just like really true love, whether it was in a friendship or an intimate relationship, was the thing that I wanted the most. But at the same time, it was the thing I feared the most. So it was like this shit pickle I was in. Like, so that's what led to my disorders. That's what led to, especially exercise and codependence and love addiction. I chased these relationships. For me, it was relationships. And in an effort to have this intimacy and this deep connection with someone, but at the same time, it was like, I felt like it was choking me.
Absolutely.
It was not working. And I was in that cycle for years and years and years, just looping over and over and over again until everything exploded.
So you talk a lot about finding people. So we have these stories, we have these shame, we have all this like baggage, this like deep rooted stuff that's going on. And when we decide that we want to heal it, you talk a lot about like finding containers that are actually conducive and deserve that story, which I find really fascinating, because there's been a lot of times where my community say like, oh, I opened up to this person and it actually like it re-anchored the trauma basically, because I was putting my story into the hands of someone who, number one, didn't give a shit, or didn't care, or didn't hold it with compassion, or tried to fix it, or whatever it was. Right. So I would love for you to just talk about what that looks like and how we can navigate that process of finding these people and like how to have those conversations.
Okay. Yeah. Ready? All right.
Ready. Let's do it.
That's actually really common. And I want to say something. I want to preface this first, because people like you and me, like we have these platforms where we share our deepest, darkest secrets. Like I know I do. I've shared stuff where my mom is like, Andrea, like, what are you doing? But I don't think that's for everyone. I don't, especially someone who's like just starting out in their journey. Like I don't suggest that people start a blog unless they feel really, really comfortable doing it. Yeah. So that being said, I think that, and it's interesting because what I see over and over again is when, you know, we get this advice to like share our story with someone who deserves the right to hear it. And we're like, okay, for some reason, a lot of people pick the people who have disappointed us in the past, who we hope, because we're ready, that this is going to be the time that they're like, that they show up for us, and they don't. A lot of times it's our parents or our siblings or our best friend that we've had since second grade, and the relationship has changed and she's not it anymore. And so I just kind of want to say that that's normal. And I'm sorry if that's happened to you, because I've done it, you know, like I've had the lesson several times. Okay, this isn't the person that I'm going to call. And these friendships, you know, when I start talking about this a lot, and I teach this in my signature program, is what happens is I talk about this topic and women kind of fall into this like, oh my God, I don't have that person. I don't have that. I call it a compassionate witness.
Oh, beautiful.
That's really, really common that we don't have it. Also, you know, we see on Sex and the City, you know, Carrie and all of them, and they're like sitting around and this big group of friends. And I don't think that's the case for most women. I think most of us have one or two people that we can call on to tell our worst shadow sides and know that they're not going to judge us, and they're not going to leave, and they're not going to run away. So getting back to, you know, this conversation, and it is really about sharing that story. Brene says it's the right story with the right person at the right time. And it's tough. Like I still am like learning how to like step into in my friendship with my best friend. Like I've told her probably like a year ago, I was like, you know, I've really been thinking about it and working on this, and I don't think I 1000% trust you. She's like, I'm okay with that.
I love that.
Huge, long way. I've come a long way, because I have also had experiences where I've shared something with a past girlfriend and she's totally judged me, and or she has tried to fix it, or she one-ups me, or and I've done the same thing to my girlfriends. Like I've been a shitty best friend, you know, and just told her she's exaggerating, or blamed her. All these things that we do incorrectly, and this is a bigger conversation, but it's about learning how to show empathy and model it in our friendships. Like, what does that even look like? Because this is not, I think compassion is an inherent trait that we have, but empathy is not. Empathy is a learned skill, and we get it wrong, and it's really uncomfortable. It is, you could be the most compassionate person in the world, and I think like the only people that are really good at that are like hospice nurses. The rest of us really have to practice it. And even they had to practice and learn, but it's about modeling it and also asking for what you need. Like this is the thing where
mic drop.
I preface conversations with my husband now, because men, like, not to stereotype, but typically they want to fix it. They're fixers.
Yes.
So if your partner or your brother or your husband or, you know, whatever is your compassionate witness, he might want to fix it. And so I always preface my conversations, if it's a big bomb I'm about to drop, and I'm like, babe, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to just put your phone down and just listen. I don't need you to fix it. I don't need anything except you just to like pay attention and nod. And maybe at the end you can ask me for like what I need. And some people are like, I just want him to know how to do it. I don't want to have to like give instructions. And I'm like, they're not mind readers.
Sorry, that's not going to happen.
You're the one that chose to get into personal development. You're the one that gets to model it. You're the one that gets to ask for what you need with kindness. And so it is about, like, I hate to use the word training, but it is kind of like training your friendships. And the best way to do that is modeling the behavior first.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so powerful. That is so powerful. And I think a lot of the times the women in my community are like, I don't have sisterhood. You
No.
know, I don't and really, like, women thrive in sisterhood, in tribes. That's always how we've always done things, you know?
Yeah.
And so, in today, it's like women feel so isolated, which is another topic that I want to talk to you about. But, would you suggest then, like, from what you said, modeling this behavior of like how to be a sister, how to be a good communicator will attract those people into your life?
Not always. I mean, like, I don't advise people to go around like leaning into the barista at Starbucks and like telling her your deepest, like, darkest secrets in hopes that you're going to be instant besties. Brene calls it hot wiring a connection when we meet someone and we're like, oh my God, like you and me, Samantha, we both have dark hair, we're both wearing black and white and have arm tattoos. Let me tell you what happened to me this morning. And then you're like,
okay.
Because I had people do it to me. Like I had this woman do it at the pool last summer, like this other mom, she's like telling me about her divorce. And I'm like, girl, I just met you like 1 minute ago. Like,
yeah, what is going on here?
Yeah. So I think that it really is about kind of testing the waters and sharing, like kind of going into the shallow end first and sharing a little bit and seeing how they reciprocate. And, you know, those people that you just mentioned, the people that are like, I don't have my sisterhood. And I always ask them, like, what have you done to try to be proactive in these friendships?
Cool.
Because a lot of times when it comes to vulnerability, people like, I want to see you you first. I'm just going to like wait for you to do it. And most likely that time will never come. So all y'all listening to this podcast, again, you're the one that chose personal development. You're the one that wants to better yourself. So you've been chosen.
You are the chosen one.
Invitation.
So you're suggesting then is like, if you want to develop that like deep level of connection and intimacy in your relationships with other women, you go first. You jump in the pool first.
You jump in the pool first. And excuse me, like there's no right or wrong way to do it. Like I think the only, you know, like what I was just saying, like don't jump into the deep end without any floaties on from the beginning and like drag people with you. It is about kind of, you know, this just happened in a friend, we're kind of new to this area and there's a woman that I've become friends with and we've had like a couple of sit down conversations where we've like shared a little bit about our past and it's going kind of organically well. And then this one time I shared something with her that was like a little bit deep. I went a little bit farther into the deep end and I could see like her body language and her face was kind of like, I'm not ready for this conversation. And I kept talking and it was like, the voice like, Andrea, just stop. But I'm like, keep part of the story. And how do we change the subject?
You're like, what do I do now? What happened?
Abort mission. So I just was like, okay, that just happened. And so now I've pulled back a little bit and I haven't shared anything deep with her. And maybe, you know, now I'll kind of maybe wait for her. So it's like this dance that we do in our friendships and
such a dance.
And we don't really know how. I can't promise you it's going to go perfectly, but I can promise you that you will live to see another day and just keep trying, like keep going out into the arena and trying.
Absolutely. And I'd love for you to talk about like courage as well, which is really, really interesting topic. Like cultivating the courage, like for you to have that conversation with her, there was like a level of courage that you needed to have in order to be vulnerable. So can you kind of talk to me about how does courage, what's like the amalgamation point between courage and vulnerability, and how does that all work? How do we cultivate the courage in order to be vulnerable?
Courage, I think, just comes with practice and you just decide, you know, it's like, I don't think people are born. I think that there are some people that are born more, you know, like risk averse than others, but I don't think that courage is something that you can like study in a book and then you're more courageous. I think courage is through your experiences,
through action.
And I think that for me, because people always ask me like, what was it that made you decide to go like public with all your stories? And those people are typically the people who are still like, my stories get up in their vulnerability grill, like, and they're just like, it gets up in their stuff and they're like, I don't know about that. But it really was just, and I think that there's, I do think that like, there's a small percentage of us who were chosen to tell our stories publicly in order to give other people, not necessarily so they can tell theirs publicly, but so they can tell it to their immediate compassionate witnesses in their circle of friends, to know that they're okay and to know that struggle happens to all of us. That being said, I think that courage builds confidence, but courage is just a choice that we make.
Courage is a choice.
It's just knowing that it's not about kicking ass all the time. It's not about winning all the time. Like I've had plenty of failures. Like the conversation I just told you about that with that woman, I was like,
you're like, I'm going to go
afterwards. Yeah. I got to go inside. Shit. And it's just about, for me, like everyone has done a courageous act in their life and everyone has failed at a courageous act in their life. So the difference is, are you going to get back out there? Like, are you going to keep going back out into what we call the arena? And it really is just about that, about getting back up again.
Absolutely. I love the whole concept of like deciding. There's so much power in like a decisive decision. Like I am just going to do this. And when we can be like so lasered and just ultimately just decide and be decisive, and we commit to it, and we don't play the like, ooh, is the grass greener, or should I have done that? And we don't like shit all over ourselves. There's so much freedom in that, because there's a reason why we made that decision. And now we get to kind of explore, all right, cool. Even if this blows up in my face, it's all by divine design. There was a reason why that blew up in your face. There was a reason why. There's a lesson to move through. And we get into like analysis paralysis, and like the perfectionism again comes in when we just don't decide. You know, we're like, if I do this, then it's going to mean this, right? The whole meaning making machine. And if I do this, it's going to mean this. It's like, how about it just means fuck all? And it just means that you get to grow and you get to expand and you get to like know yourself more, you know? And
I mean, I've learned more about myself from the times that I've totally screwed up versus the times where everything's smooth sailing and everything works out. Like I did not become wise and on the path to healing and evolved because everything worked out. Like I became this way because I fell on my face.
You got slapped around.
You know, like I got beat up. And I had a choice. Like, am I going to continue down this path, or am I going to get back up and try something else? And I chose the latter, and it's been a huge learning experience.
I think we underestimate our ability to just decide and choose. Like the word choice has like a lot of power behind it, right? Like I'm choosing this. I'm deciding this for myself. I love that.
We underestimate our resilience as humans. Like I have people who say, they hear my story and they're like, I don't know how I could have gone through that. And I'm like, why? Like everybody can. Like people have experienced way more heartache and trauma than I have. And it's just, it's a matter of deciding and really like looking, like I always say, like rip the covers off and look at what's underneath, because it's not the food, it's not the booze, it's not the relationships, it's what's underneath, like at the root of it that's causing you all this stress. It's like, I always ask the question, like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve by binging, by drinking 2 bottles of wine a night, by, you know, like that's the question, which I don't think a lot of people can answer right away when someone asks them that. It is about like ripping the covers off and like going underneath and going underneath and going underneath. That's when the real like life explosion happens. And I mean that in a positive way, like where you're like, oh, and you're not the only one who's felt that way. A lot of times when we start to do that work, we're like, oh my God, I'm the only one that feels this way. And you're not. You're not. None of us are that special.
Oh, yeah. You're not self-important, okay? Come on, just pipe down a little.
All the same feelings. All the same.
Totally. You know, it's so fascinating to me, the amount of times I hear on the phone when I'm talking to potential clients or whatever it is, like, Sam, you're the first person I've ever told this, you know, you're the first person that I ever told that I have like, that I use food to numb my feelings. And I can hear an energetic shift in their voice when, as soon as they tell me, it's like, there's this lightness. And I think that whole concept of like, you're so not alone. Like there's 91% of women hate their bodies. Like 70% of women have disordered eating patterns, you know? And it's interesting as well, because a lot of times the clients that I work with were former alcoholics, sex addicts, you know, drug addicts, whatever it was. And then they're just like swapping out the drug, you know, because food is a drug, you know, you're numbing your emotions. You're stuffing down that feeling with a brownie versus a bottle of wine. And so again, it's like what you said, like just take off the veil. What's really going on there? And ultimately knowing your body is really not going to give you anything that you can't handle. Right. It's not. Yeah. It's not. So what we're talking about here is shame, which I'm excited to kind of dig into this. Brene Brown, the way she says this, shame is I am bad, guilt is I did something bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did something bad. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of speak to shame, how that feels in our body, and how we need to use vulnerability to heal shame?
Okay. Well,
If that's what you believe. If that's what
yeah,
you
no, and
believe.
Brene says that the definition of shame is like this feeling of innate unworthiness,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is, I like that definition, but I think it's hard for people to kind of wrap their head around that unless they've studied her work extensively, which I know a lot of people listening probably have not. And so the way I describe it is, and you asked the question of like, what's happening in your body? You know what? It's different for a lot of people. So I invite people to really, in the work that I do, there's like this little gingerbread, and we think of, it's a really fun session, I say sarcastically. What I have is have my clients think of all these shaming moments throughout their life, like childhood. Everyone can probably think of one from middle school, high school, work, in relationships, from your family of origin is usually a big one. And people have different physiological symptoms. Mm-hmm. A lot of the same physiological symptoms as vulnerability. Like when we say something vulnerable or something vulnerable really happens, it's a lot of the same physical symptoms, and a lot of the same physical symptoms as humiliation. I won't get into that too much. Mm-hmm. But really, I want to say this about about shame, is that we were talking about this a little bit before, is that a lot of women are like, I don't really identify with that. You know, I like Brene's work, and but I don't walk around like feeling shameful or ashamed. Like they kind of reserve that for people who have done acts like, embezzled money from their church or something, like those types of things. But really, here's what's happening in the women that I work with, and I'm sure a lot of your community as well, is that anytime you're engaging in perfectionism, people pleasing, hiding and isolating, anytime you're engaging in negative self-talk, because really negative self-talk is shame manifested.
Yeah.
Anytime you are engaging in self-sabotage, the imposter syndrome, that is you running away from shame. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to avoid it because we know deep down at a subconscious level, usually, what shame is, because we've all had these experiences. Yeah. You know, it's like, we don't want to feel rejected, you know, whether we've been bullied, or I always tell this story, like I was in 7th grade in math, and it was the first time that I started to really struggle in math. And my math teacher, he would we'd have weekly quizzes, and he would hand them back. And the people that got a D or an F on their quizzes, he would staple this extra piece of paper on it, and you had to have it signed by your parents. Mm-hmm. And he would always hand those out at the end of the stack. So he's handing them out, and he's like, Andrea, you know, and like everybody in the whole class knew who got a D or an F. And like, it was called like a tag that you had to have it. So I remember that so much, of being like so ashamed, that I was stupid, that I was an idiot, that I'm never going to, I'm going to get an F on an actual report card. And so like, we all know what that feels like, to be just like, everyone's laughing at you. Everyone thinks you're dumb. So we grow up and we want to avoid that at all costs. Mm-hmm. So then what do? We perfect, we please, we prove, we perform. And that is exhausting, but that becomes our norm in order to survive. Like we make up that is survival. Yeah. And so how vulnerability is the antithesis of that is to actually, and this is not, I need to say, like, my work is not about becoming a person who doesn't have shame. Like we still have it.
Oh,
like, we
for
still
sure.
Absolutely have it.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of becoming resilient to it. So I'll tell you this story that happened to me maybe a year and a half ago. So we had just moved to North Carolina, and my son is on the autism spectrum, and he was at, we were at a new school. And so we had to have this meeting with his teacher, the school principal, and his special education director. So they had his records pulled from his previous school, and they were in this meeting, the 4 of us. And one of the women was reading aloud from his records. So it's when he got his diagnosis from the psychologist. And so I had forgotten that this was even in his records. So they're reading, and they're like, Colton's mother has a history of alcohol abuse.
Oh my.
But I'm sitting there in this meeting with these women
my God.
that I had just met. We had just moved to this town. And, like I didn't know them, and I'm like trying to make friends, we were just talking.
Oh, girl.
So yeah, they're reading, and I'm like,
holy.
And I feel this like wash over me of just, and I wanted to like interject and be like, well, actually I have, years of sobriety, and I was just a wine drinker. You know, I have a really, I didn't get any DUIs. Like my brain was like, explain, make this go away. And I was like, okay, that just happened. And so I went on with the meeting. And so here's what could have happened afterwards. My go-to would have been that I would have avoided those women at all costs. I would not have participated in my son's school or talked to his teacher whenever possible. Or I would have like made a joke about it, or I would have just like, you know, beat myself up for it. And, you know, if it was a different situation, sometimes when we are shamed by someone else, this wouldn't have been appropriate, but like I would have thrown something back at them and shamed them back.
Yeah.
So there's all these kind of like crappy things that we do when we are in shame.
Yeah.
What I did instead is I went home and I told the story to a compassionate witness, you know, someone who has earned the right to hear my story. And I didn't realize it at the time when I called my friend Courtney and I'm telling her about it, I started crying because I was just like, it was a total shaming moment. And, you know, and even though I'm a sober person who is really outspoken about my alcoholism, but it was like in that moment of real life where I didn't know these people. And so that's what resilience is. It's the vulnerability piece is sharing your story, and because it dissipates. You know, I still feel like some residual, but now I'm able to tell the story and laugh about it with you. Whereas before I was like, can the floor swallow me up because I'm terrified right now?
Can I just disappear?
Go away. Yeah. And so that's where the vulnerability comes in is, and really like this common humanity that I know every woman at that table has experienced something like that.
For sure.
Something has happened. They may or may not have felt kind of uncomfortable for me. And I have no control over what stories they make up. And really just knowing that everybody has these experiences and telling my story with someone who has deserved the right to hear it.
I think that's super important. And for those of you who are listening right now, I know for a fact you can feel what Andrea's talking about. Like, oh God, that happened to me and I've been suppressing it for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And I would so encourage you to find your Courtney, you know, like start to think about like, I call it friend inventory. Whereas like, you know, you have certain friends for certain things. Like I know I have girlfriends who like, all I want to do is just shoot the shit, talk about boys. Right. And then you have like your people who it's like Elizabeth, for instance, the alto, it's like, she's my like deep, like soul. Like, I know I can just like, she's like spiritual. This like spiritual closed container where I can just like throw anything there, whatever. So take a look at the people, the key players in your life and really get clear on like, who do I feel safe and secure with to really share those stories of shame, like deep shame. And for the women who are listening, I know a lot of this is around body image and food, you know, and so admitting to yourself and to another person, like Andrea said, just it does dissipate it. And it takes like that edge of courage. You're going to feel the edge. It's going to push an edge for you because your norm, your default is like, let me just suppress this. Let me just move on. Let me just forget about it. Let me pretend that everything is okay all the time.
Be over it by now. Yeah.
And then
especially when stuff that happens like in childhood or when we're younger, like we think that like I'm, 40 years old, like shouldn't I be over it by now? I can't believe I'm still talking about my body shit. I can't believe I'm still struggling with food. And it's like, you have pushed that down so far. Like the body keeps score. Like the body always knows the wisest part of us. And I want to say something too to what you were saying about your friends is that many times, even when we have that trusted person, like you have your Elizabeth, sometimes we bulldoze past those people and then pull one of the girls that we usually talk about boys with to tell our shame stories with, and it doesn't end up working out.
Oh, yes. Such a good point. Why is that? Is it because we're wanting some level of like approval or connection with that person? That might be it. You know,
I think it could be a lot of different reasons. It's like, maybe it's like we trusted that one person so much. Maybe we just want to like test the waters or something. And I don't know. I've done it too, where I'm like, that wasn't smart. But, and it's like, even like my mom, like I love my mom so much, but she is not my person that my mom still isn't my person, but still every once in a while, like something will happen. I'm crying and like, you want your mama? And I call her up and then she's saying things and I'm like, and then I come back to reality and I'm like,
why did I do that?
My mom's very much like oh, honey, it'll all work out. You know, if tomorrow's a new day, like she's that person. She's like a silver lining person, which I love. But when it's like really hard shit, I'm like, I broke down one time on the phone with her. I'm like, Mom, sometimes I just need you to tell me like, honey, this sucks. I'm sorry you're going through this. That sucks.
Yeah.
Like, oh,
like you're in a shitstorm and I'm sorry.
But I don't think she can. She's my mom. And, you know, just moms are like that. But I was going to say something else about friendship. Now I forgot. So never mind.
You're like, and scene. End scene. So, man, I've so enjoyed this conversation. I could talk to you for 3 hours straight, I'm sure. But we got to wrap things up. No, Andrea, I love what you're about. First of all, I want to say my middle name is Andrea, but it's pronounced Andrea. Kind of weird, but there we
go. The Valley Girl way.
Andrea. So weird. So yourkickasslife.com is where people can find you. So I'm going to talk to you about two things. Number one, 52 Ways to Have a Kick-Ass Life is your book. And I know there's a little baby book coming out that you're pregnant with something. So why don't you like quickly tell us about what that's like?
So yes, 52 Ways to Live a Kick-Ass Life came out in 2013. And in January 2018 is How to Stop Feeling Like Shit, 14
Best
Ways.
title ever.
Best title ever. I'm so glad they did not want to change my title. 14 habits that are holding you back from happiness. So basically what that book is all the things we were just talking about, like perfectionism, self-sabotage, hiding out, numbing, people pleasing. There's 14 of them. And these are the habits that we do in order to avoid shame. And I don't just like talk about the 14 habits. I talk about the solutions too. And that's because all those 14 things make us feel like shit. That's why I titled it that way.
I love that because I think a lot of self-help books are like, here's all the stuff. And like, okay, now what? It's like we've opened up all these things. So I love that. That's brilliant. And another thing, as mentioned, we could talk for ages, and I do want to get you back on again closer to launch date. So for everyone listening, note January 18th. January 2018. I was like,
2018. Yeah.
That sounds weird. January 2018 is when the book is coming out. We'll have you back on. And in the meantime, Andrea has a kick-ass podcast, Your Kick-Ass Life. So be sure to subscribe. And where else can people find you? Is there anything else?
Facebook and Instagram are my two places I like to hang out.
Amazing. Well, thank you, girl, so much for sharing your story and your stuff with us. Like I said, all the things that are your jam, perfectionism, control, isolation, are all things that are so like it comes up in our community all the time. So I know our listeners are going to find huge value in this conversation. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you
so much. And yeah, we'll definitely get you back on soon.
Awesome. Can't wait.
All right. Take care. Love you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode on the Hungry for Happiness podcast. You can join the conversation with women just like yourself at hungryonfacebook.com. Until next week, ladies, stay classy and badassy.